Welcome to One Way to Machines and the Volvo P1 series. Tim Hortons Coffee and Canadian Tire Parts. The Canadian Clunker Car Owner's Way. Parking lot repairs. This video is going to be doing a repair as the first step in terms of what we've been discussing in the random series for this car. The most plausible explanation given on the forum so far for the problem that I'm having, which others are as well, is that the brake rotors are warped and they're causing a worn bushing to shake under braking. While the bushings on this car are most likely shot in the front, I'm not going to do that as a first step because the car's still fine over bumps. Hopefully the brake rotors solve it, and I'm going to show you guys now why it's important to check both sides of the rotors. This stuff sounds very basic and you'd think, how could I have an oversight like this? But a lot of us with our daily, you get out on the driver's side, you just look at the rotor, you say, it has a lip, I'm fine, and go. But yesterday I took 1 second and looked at my passenger side rotor, and we're going to zoom in there and I'll show you what happened. I was intending on doing this parking lot brake job repair, but I forgot my C-clamp, so we'll go over the parts that I brought and you can know what you need if you're going to do this in a parking lot and you want to pack up your car and just go do it. Alright, so here we are at the passenger side rotor. Okay, I'm going to try to shine a light in here. This will be more clear once I get it onto the table and show you guys. But the outside edge of the rotor is not lipped, okay? It has gone inwards, so there's a crease inside. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this could definitely be causing our problems. I've also seen rust on the inside of this passenger side rotor before, so this could very well be the case in this car. There's someone else on the forum that's done all of these repairs and still has a problem, so let's see what happens with this car. The driver's side rotor just has a lip. It should be replaced. I've already put new Bosch pads on this recently, so I'm going to attempt to reuse the pads. The correct way is to redo the pads as well, but this will kind of be an experiment in a way that if you've had Bosch pads on warped rotors, say for, I don't know, about 6 or 7 months, now it's gotten really bad, will the pads kind of resurface themselves with a little bit of driving and still be usable, so you don't have to spend the money? But if you're doing this job, just get the new pads too. So let this be a bit of an experiment there. Now let's go over all the items I brought and why they weren't enough. Well, I mean, the C-clamp is the only thing I didn't have because I'm using the brake pads and the new rotors are going to be much thicker, so I have to put the brake pads in. I might be able to get away with it, but it's not something I'm trying to get opened up in a parking lot and get stranded here. I will go over my flat deck build on the inside for the V50, as it makes the car very practical without any permanent changes. So in one of the future random series videos, when I have to recondition the rear seats, we're going to remove this and I'll show you the process and measurements in building this for your car if you want it to have more utility. So here you can see with the short bungee how this floor jack is completely secured. Alright, so you want to bring some brake clean with yourself, your rotors obviously, a pen for if you apply any brake cleaner inside, a 4-pound hammer if you have to knock off your rotors, a 19mm breaker bar for the wheels, a floor jack obviously, some rags, a short bungee to hang the caliper, a drill or a screwdriver in order to get the rotor bolt out, some gloves, 1/2-inch ratchet helps. You want to have your hex bit sockets. I think it's an H6 or an H7. Pretty sure it's an H7 for the caliper pin bolts. Okay, you'd want to clean those up and put some grease on them, but that grease usually wears off pretty quickly, so I'm not too concerned about that. The caliper bracket bolts are 15mm, so you want some sockets or a wrench for that. And just a hammer if you have to knock stuff around, because that happens in brake jobs. and obviously a kneeling pad if you're working in a parking lot. As stated, the item I forgot to bring was my C-clamps to push the piston and the caliper in to fit the new rotors. Not taking any risks with that out here to try to jam it on, and plus that's not the right way to do things on any car anyways. So I'm gonna go grab my C-clamp and we'll see where I end up doing this job and what the results are. If you have a floor jack with one of these safety pins, you don't need to bring jack stands. If not, you do. This little piece of scaffolding end here is what I use as a cheater bar, and that's most likely going to be used on the 1/2-inch ratchet when we try to break the 15mm caliper bolts loose. Place the rim under the car as a safety. Now that the wheel's off, you can maybe see that edge on the rotor a bit better. I can't show it on camera, it won't focus on such a small area, but that outer lip is indented inwards. So it's a flat rotor, imagine, and then it dips down to where the lip is on the outside. All right, so we're gonna curl in underneath. Pop the cap off on this and undo the H6. And there with the flashlight at the top, I'm pointing at the other cap you have to pop off and take off the H6 for the brake pads. Now back here, you have one of the 15mm bolts and up there's a second one. This is gonna be risky with the rust out here in a parking lot, but you do not need to take apart these Torx bolts, E-Torxes. I hate this design. These things are just badly designed in terms of brake sliders. Okay, so all that cranking wasn't needed. It's just the rubber that kind of holds them sometimes and you think you're still threading it out. But both of them are out and both of them are clean on the passenger side. And another stroke of brilliance, I didn't bring any screwdrivers because I forgot about the anti-rattle clip, but we'll try to get it in and out with the hammer. Well, that worked. Get my bungee ready. These calipers are quite heavy, so be ready for this. The pads look to be wearing evenly and in good condition, so let's see how everything else goes. Be careful with that brake line, okay? Mine is doing just fine in that position there. Now I'm going to take off the 15mm bracket bolts at the back for this piece here. Son of a... They're actually 16mm for the 320mm. So that video that I saw that showed that they were 15s, maybe that's for cars with the 300mm. Or maybe I heard wrong. I'll go check that video again. But look, I'm stuck again here. Let's see if we can figure something out or if we have to put this all back together. So by luck I had more sockets with me. On this 2006 T5 all-wheel drive T5 M66, it's actually an 18mm socket that's going to remove those bolts. Right, so just to show you guys, I used a 1/2-inch ratchet with this and my piece of scaffolding end. I kneeled down at the front passenger headlight and I pushed down on there and I cracked the bottom one loose. Sorry, I cracked the top one loose. Now let's crack the bottom one loose before we go any further. Same technique worked for the bottom bolt. So there's the two bolts, they're in pretty good condition, and the bracket just came off like you saw. Someone pulled up with some music, so yeah. Okay, so see, my rotor is stuck on here pretty nicely after Canadian winter, so we're gonna have to whack it. We could get stranded here if I mess this up and they gave me the wrong part. So I'm gonna try to hit it in this area first. Nope. Man, if these rotors are the wrong... I'm gonna check the rotors first, because if they're the wrong size and I whack this one, we're screwed. Alright, they are 320 mils, so we should be okay. Could even be rust buildup behind this that caused the vibrations. But it actually looks pretty clean now that we're here. I don't know if you guys can see it, but these rotors from Quebec Winters, because I never changed these. Hopefully the lighting's good enough. But look, there's tons of broken off crust and all kinds of stuff. This could just have been the vibrations from this. And there's that rust on the inside. Everything is all rusted and falling apart. This could be causing imbalances. There's that lip edge, maybe you can see it. Look at all the rust that fell on the ground. The hub looks in decent shape. I'm just gonna brake clean it off a bit and off we go. If you see buildup here, you want to take, I don't know, maybe like an 800 grit sandpaper and just go in here a little bit and clean up the rust. But with that condition of rotors, this stuff, these surfaces are all still flat, so we're good to go here. So here's the Canadian Tire certified rotor versus the old one. I'll flip them around. Look at the inside of the hat on the new one. And then look at how messed up the inside of my old one was. I have no idea what brand was on this car before. But I'm happy I'm changing this. If you're using non-coated rotors like this, you need to brake clean all of the protective film off. While we have more room, let's take out the old brake pads and compress the piston. I brought some of the old brake pads I had for this process. There are other ways of doing this. This is just my way. If you're doing it like this, be careful not to skate the brake line on that bracket up there. This is just a Canadian Tire Mastercraft 6-inch seat clamp. You'll have better angles if you're not working for a camera on a tripod, obviously. So that's why I'm struggling with it a bit. Other than that, this is usually very simple. Okay, you can see that this is still here because the bracket actually comes in here and is an added portion. So don't think that you need to press this all the way flush with here. This is as far as it needs to go. And these brake pads are relatively new, so I barely pushed it in. I got lucky there, but the reason I always stress this brake line stuff, look, something is broken here. And this is a very sharp edge. And I scathed this here a little bit. Fortunately, I was holding it and it didn't cut. But this little bracket here could have cut this brake line and we'd be screwed right now. But for now we're fine, okay? Just be careful if you have something broken off like me right here. So now I'm gonna reinstall the Bosch brake pads from last season. They do seem okay for wear. The only thing that I would say, maybe our next step is gonna be brake pads. I should have bought new ones, but whatever. Is this inside lip is kind of worn on this one, okay? This in itself could cause problems, but let's see what happens. The second one will sit nicer once we have the caliper bracket there. Let's put on the new rotor. I don't have torque specs for the brake bolts. You should get the torque specs, but I just crank them down nice body tight, put your full force on it, and she should be just fine. And then come back after 50 kilometers and check to see if it's still tight. Let's put the bracket back on with the 15mm bolts. Don't be a noob goof like me and put it in the wrong way first. The clean side is where the bolts go, okay? Make sure to orient it so it goes around the caliper. We all make some mistakes, but now I'm gonna put it in properly. This slides in between the metal piece and the rotor, okay? This can be a little confusing if you're tired, but yeah, it needs to be around the rotor, obviously, to hold the pads. Alright, so with the bracket tightened down and torqued to spec, the bracket needs to be flush. It hangs a little bit, so make sure not to rub it on this in the process. Just leave it as is. I should have technically cleaned out all the surfaces in the bracket and on the brake side, but I didn't bring any of this stuff. Do that if you have your tools with you, okay? You also want to clean up and grease these slider pins, okay, with brake rated temperature grease. Put the slider pin bolts back. I'm still gonna make that rear brakes video of problems I ran into, but these things can be really annoying, okay? You gotta push them, the grease is good pushing them past the rubber, but you could turn these for a long time and they're actually not threading. So make sure you have a little bit of inwards pressure, don't cross thread, and get these in. This setup with a little H7 has been working for me, but for the top one, if you have a short extension, it just makes it a little easier, but this is just fine. What I mean by what I hate about that design is that it wobbles in there and the threads are short. So when you put it in, you have to be skilled and keep it centered, and you also have to put a bunch of pressure without being able to see any threads in order to get it in. The bottom one went in smooth, the top one is giving me a fight. But that's what I'm telling you, you might run into these things with these ridiculously designed slider bolts. Alright, so I'm going to show you what I was just talking about. I just realized this, okay? See this part here? It doesn't sit flush, not on the top or the bottom. What I was having trouble with was the bottom one was in the right place, which is why it went in. But the top one, look, it was just a little bit out. So make sure to push this in, have a little lip here, and then your top slider bolt will go on smooth too. That sound is just the ratchet hitting the lower control arm. You can do the top one from the top, but you have the best visibility doing all of them from the back, both of them from the back. Alright, so crank those bolts down nice and tight. And make sure if your rotor, some of them might have a screw that holds this in, this one didn't, so just make sure you don't play with this too much until you get the wheel back on. Torque spec for those slider bolts, I'm not sure, but again, crank them down nice and tight, come back and check them later. Make sure to put the caps back on so that you don't get any debris in there and it washes out the brake grease that you put on them. The anti-rattle clip for the rear brakes is really annoying to put on sometimes. This one I found is a bit easier. Let's see what I do with this. Okay, so put the top lip in first, then there's a little lip at the bottom, you slide in, and then give a little force to the last one to get it in. Just make sure it's snug, okay? These things will have a tendency to pop out, at least on the rear they do. But just check all of them, and you saw I just got it in by hand with no tools. Okay, don't put dirty hands on, especially if you're working out in the middle of a parking lot like me. But this should be fine. Okay, so I'm gonna do the driver's side one off camera because I might get kicked out of here if I take too long with the filming. Yeah, so if there's any difficulty with that side, I'll let you know. But once everything is back on, I'll tell you the results. Just make sure to torque your wheel lugs back down tight with your 19mm, and let's see what happens. Alright, so I'm at this stage on the driver's side, and interestingly enough, I'm going to show you the caliper bracket bolts are 15s on this side. So there were 18s on the passenger side, 15s on the driver's side. I can't speak to 2.4s and people with the 300mm rotors, but for this car, this is what it's turned out to be. Alright, so there's the bolt. And there, you see, that's on there, and it's a 15. So it's offset on the P1 T5 odd V50 at least. Different on both sides. Alright guys, so here we are, parking lot brakes. The other video I saw said they were 15s. So at first I tried throwing a 14 on and I had a bit of trouble getting on because there's a ton of rust on this car on those bolts. So I went to the 15 based on what the video said, and of course, right when I went to crack it, it started stripping that hex bolt. So now I tried to throw 14 on the top one, and it seems like it's gripping with some of the rust scraped off. So I can't tell you if it's a 14 or a 15 yet, but also in the middle of this parking lot here, I'm not trying to get myself stranded. So this will actually be kind of interesting and kind of ridiculous because we're gonna test this and see if changing the passenger side rotor fixed it. But this rotor on this side is banged up too and needs to be changed. But this is just the situation and what happened. So I'm gonna put everything back and we'll see what happens until the next part of the series. If I can get that bolt off on this side for the caliper bracket easily or not. Alright guys, so the pedal will sink to the floor on the first brake while the pads seat themselves. And let's see if our fix worked here in the parking lot first. Alright guys, so the camera battery died out on me there on that clip. So I drove back home 100 km/h to 0 stops at red lights, no vibration. So I'm 90% gonna say that just the passenger side rotor was the issue in this case and it solved the problem. But once I get some more driving in, we'll see if the problem returns or not. Like you saw last time, the tire pressure was very short-lived, but this seems much more promising. I'm gonna do one drive down the street and brake and see what happens, just so you guys have some reference. I'm not holding the camera. That wasn't a nice shift. And braking hard. Absolutely no vibration. I think we're good, but subscribe, stay tuned for the next part of the random series or brake series, where we conclusively hopefully finish this series. So the suggestion that there's a worn bush that's being shaken by a warped brake rotor seems to have been right in this case. That doesn't mean I don't need to change my control arms and other bushings, okay? Those things are still worn out, but hey, this car is fine. It's pretty old and rusty. You guys see what we have to deal with that bolt on the other side now to change the other rotor. Just to be clear, there's no vibration or suspension clunking sound on braking. So stay tuned for the next part of the series. Thanks for watching.